The Morphine Syrette felt like lead in Corporal Davis's palm. December 18th, 1944, near Bastogne. 2 men bleeding out in the same frozen foxhole, 1 American, 1 German, both needing the last dose he carried. Davis had trained for wounds, not choices. Could he patch the enemy soldier who'd been firing at his unit an hour ago? The weight of that small glass vial decided who would see morning and who wouldn't. He looked at both faces, both young, both afraid. The American private clutched his side, eyes locked on Davis. The German boy, maybe 19, whispered something in broken English. Davis had 60 seconds before shock claimed them both. He joined the medics to save lives, not play God, but the forest didn't care about his oath, and dawn was 4 hours away. Every choice in war writes its own kind of permanent record. The foxhole was 6 feet deep and barely wide enough for 3. Snow had stopped falling an hour before. Now the air hung cold and still. Davis knelt between the 2 wounded men. His medical bag sat open beside him. Inside were 2 bandages, 1 tourniquet, and the morphine syrette that would decide everything. The bag had been full 3 days ago. 12 syrettes, 20 bandages, 3 tourniquets, sulfur powder, plasma, all the tools a medic needed to keep men alive. Then the Germans closed the circle around Bastogne, cut the roads, stopped the supply trucks. Davis had been rationing ever since, trading supplies with other medics, hoarding what he could, making impossible decisions about who needed what. He'd used his last plasma yesterday. Soldier from Tennessee, with massive blood loss, needed 2 units. Davis only had 1. The kid died anyway, used his second-to-last syrette this morning. Corporal with a shattered femur, screaming so loud the Germans probably heard it. Davis gave him the morphine to shut him up as much as to help with pain. Couldn't have the whole line compromised because one man couldn't stay quiet. Now he had 1 syrette left, and 2 men who needed it. Private Eddie Johnson lay on the left, 22 years old, from Indiana. He'd taken shrapnel to the abdomen when the mortar hit. Blood soaked through his field jacket. His breathing came in short gasps. His face had gone pale. Davis had seen that color before. It meant internal bleeding. Johnson had been in the division since September. Replacement after market garden. Farm kid. Talked about corn and tractors whenever he got the chance. Showed Davis pictures of his girl back home, Sarah, pretty blonde with a bright smile. They were supposed to get married when the war ended. Johnson carried her picture in his helmet liner, looked at it every night before sleep. He was a good soldier, reliable, did what he was told, didn't complain. The kind of guy who volunteered for extra duty and shared his rations when someone else ran short. Davis had treated him twice before, once for frostbite on his toes, once for a minor shrapnel wound to the arm. Both times Johnson had joked through the pain, made light of it, tried to keep morale up. He wasn't joking now. The pain was too severe. His eyes were wide with fear. He knew how bad it was, could feel his own blood pooling inside his body, could sense his strength fading with each breath. Davis had checked the wound when he first arrived, felt Johnson's abdomen. It was rigid, distended, classic signs of internal hemorrhaging. Probably the liver, maybe the spleen, could be both. Without surgery, Johnson had a few hours at most. With morphine, he'd at least die peacefully. Without it, he'd die in agony. Shock would set in. His body would shut down organ by organ. He'd be conscious for most of it. The German soldier sprawled on the right. He looked even younger than Johnson, blonde hair matted with ice. His left leg was shattered below the knee. Bone showed through the torn trouser leg. He'd been crying, but the tears had frozen on his cheeks. When he saw Davis looking at him, he tried to speak. His uniform was wear-marked, not SS, regular army. The jacket was worn thin, patches sewn over holes. No winter gear, just a standard field uniform meant for milder weather. The Germans were as unprepared for this winter as the Americans were, maybe worse. Their supply lines were stretched even thinner. The leg wound was catastrophic. Davis could see the damage clearly. The fibula was completely shattered. The tibia was fractured in at least 3 places. Muscle tissue was torn. Tendons were severed. Blood vessels were ruptured. Even with immediate surgical intervention, the leg couldn't be saved. Amputation was certain. Above the knee, probably. Maybe mid-thigh if infection set in. But that was assuming he survived the next few hours. The blood loss was severe. The pain had to be unbearable. The body could only take so much trauma before it gave up. Klaus was right at that edge, teetering between life and death. The morphine could pull him back from the edge, give his body a chance to stabilize, or at least make his death less awful. Without the morphine, he'd go into hypovolemic shock. His blood pressure would drop. His heart would race trying to compensate. His organs would start failing. Kidneys first, then liver, then everything else. He'd be conscious through most of it, aware, terrified, in agony. Death would take an hour, maybe 2. Every minute would feel like an eternity. "Bitter," the German whispered. "Please." Davis's hands shook. Not from the cold. He'd been a medic for 8 months now. Landed at Normandy in June. Fought through France all summer and fall. He'd patched dozens of men in that time. Americans mostly, a few French civilians, one British paratrooper who'd gotten lost during Market Garden, but never an enemy soldier, never someone who'd been shooting at him an hour before. He'd started medical school at Johns Hopkins in September 1942, 20 years old, fresh from Pennsylvania. His father had saved for years to afford tuition. Thomas Davis was going to be a doctor. First in the family, his mother had cried with pride when he got the acceptance letter. He'd finished exactly 3 months of classes before the draft notice came, December 1942, report for induction. The school tried to get him a deferment. Medical students were valuable, but the army needed bodies more than it needed future doctors. Davis reported as ordered. Basic training at Fort Benning. 8 weeks of hell. Running, shooting, learning to follow orders. Davis was decent at most of it. Not the best. Not the worst. Just another face in the formation. They asked who had medical training. Davis raised his hand. 3 months of medical school counted for something. They sent him to Fort Sam Houston. Medic training. 12 weeks. They taught him to bandage wounds, set bones, stop bleeding, basic stuff, combat medicine. Nothing like what he'd learned at Johns Hopkins. No theory, no anatomy lectures, just practical skills. Keep men alive long enough to reach a surgeon. That was the whole job. Davis had been good at it. Top of his class. Instructors said he had steady hands, good instincts, stayed calm under pressure. They were right about everything except the pressure part. Davis had never been under real pressure during training. Rubber wounds and fake blood don't prepare you for the real thing. Normandy had been his education. June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach. Davis hit the sand in the 3rd wave. The beach was chaos. Men screaming, blood everywhere. Machine gun fire cutting through the air like rain. Davis had frozen, just stood there in the surf with water up to his knees. Couldn't move, couldn't think. A sergeant grabbed him, pulled him toward the seawall, yelled at him to start working, pointed at a kid lying in the sand, maybe 19, gut wound, screaming for his mother. Davis knelt beside him, hands shaking so bad he could barely open his medical bag, tried to remember the training, tried to stop the bleeding, failed. The kid died while Davis worked on him, just stopped breathing, went quiet. Davis stared at the body for a long moment. First dead man he'd seen up close. Wouldn't be the last. He'd worked on 11 more men that day, saved 3, lost 8. The math never got better. Most wounds that happened on that beach were beyond what a medic could fix. Too much trauma, too much blood loss, too much everything. But Davis kept trying, moved from one casualty to the next. did what he could. Sometimes it was enough. Usually it wasn't. By nightfall, he'd stopped counting, stopped thinking, just worked. Bandage, tourniquet, morphine when he had it. Move to the next one. Repeat until you ran out of supplies or men or both. France had been different. Slower, more methodical. The division pushed inland. Davis moved with them. Set up aid stations. Treated everything from gunshot wounds to dysentery. Learned the rhythm of combat medicine. The patterns of injury. The sounds men made when they were dying versus when they might survive. He'd gotten better at it. Steadier. More confident. Other medics looked up to him. Came to him with questions. Called him Doc. Even though he wasn't a real doctor. Just a kid from Pennsylvania who'd had 3 months of medical school and 12 weeks of training. Market Garden in September had tested him again. Different kind of fighting. Urban combat. Close quarters. Davis had treated a British paratrooper who'd been shot through the chest. Collapsed lung. Sucking chest wound. Davis had sealed it with petroleum gauze. Kept the soldier alive long enough for evacuation. The Brit had lived. Wrote Davis a letter 3 months later thanking him. Davis still had that letter. One of the few times he knew for sure he'd made a difference. Then came Bastogne. December. The Germans launched a massive offensive through the Ardennes, caught the Allies by surprise, pushed them back, surrounded the 101st Airborne, and attached units at Bastogne. Davis's unit was attached. Combat medics, 300 men suddenly cut off from supply lines, surrounded by enemy forces, fighting in the worst winter Belgium had seen in decades. The siege had lasted 2 weeks so far. Supplies dwindled daily. Food was rationed. Ammunition was low. Medical supplies were almost gone. Every medic in the division was making choices. Who gets morphine? Who gets bandages? Who gets treatment at all? Triage turned savage when there wasn't enough for everyone. Davis had seen medics crack under the pressure. One guy started hoarding supplies, hiding them from other medics, got caught and court-martialed. Another just walked away, left his post, disappeared into the forest. They found him 3 days later, frozen to death. Maybe an accident, maybe not. Davis kept working, kept making the hard calls, kept trying to save lives with less and less to work with. He'd stopped sleeping more than 2 hours at a time, stopped eating more than once a day to make rations last, stopped feeling much of anything except tired. And now this, 2 men, 1 Syrette, the hardest call yet. The German had been part of a patrol, 6 men moving through the trees just after dark. Johnson's squad had been rotating back from the line when they stumbled into each other. The firefight lasted maybe 3 minutes. 4 Germans died immediately. 1 ran. This one took a bullet to the leg and went down screaming. Davis had heard the sequence from his position 70 yards back. First, the shouts. German voices yelling warnings. Then the M1 Garands opening up. The distinctive ping of rifle fire. Then the German Mausers responding. Deeper sound. Slower rate of fire. Then the grenade. The explosion that ended it. The patrol encounter had been pure chance. Neither side knew the other was there. Both groups were just trying to survive another night in the frozen forest. Both were hungry. Both were exhausted. Both were terrified. Then they saw each other and training took over. Kill or be killed. No time to think. Just react. Johnson caught shrapnel when someone threw a grenade. Probably one of his own men. Friendly fire happened more than anyone wanted to admit. The explosion killed 2 more Americans and sent the rest running for cover. By the time the smoke cleared, the forest was quiet again. Just Johnson and the German, both bleeding, both crying for help. Davis had been following behind the squad. Standard procedure. Medics stayed back during contact. Less chance of losing medical support if things went bad. He'd heard the shots and hit the ground. Waited 5 minutes. When the shooting stopped, he moved forward. Found Johnson first. Then the German, both in the same crater, both dying. The crater was actually an old shell hole from earlier fighting, maybe a week old, maybe a month. Hard to tell. The forest was cratered with them. Every artillery barrage left more scars in the earth. This one was about 8 feet across and 4 feet deep. The mortar round had landed right in the center of it, turned it into a deeper hole, a grave, essentially. Johnson had crawled into it after the explosion, trying to find cover. The German had been thrown into it by the blast, landed hard. That's probably when his leg shattered. Impact trauma on top of the bullet wound. Bad luck compounded by worse luck. When Davis found them, they were both semi-conscious. Johnson was calling for a medic. The German was just moaning. Both were bleeding into the frozen mud. Both were going to die without help. Maybe even with help. Davis had slid into the crater, checked both men, assessed the wounds, made the initial judgment, both critical. Both needed immediate intervention, both needed morphine, and he had 1 Syrette left. Now he had 1 Syrette of morphine and 2 men who needed it. The standing orders were clear. Treat Americans first, always. Enemy wounded came second. If at all, Davis had heard those words 100 times during training. American lives mattered more. That's what the manual said. That's what every officer told them. But the Hippocratic Oath didn't have exceptions. First, do no harm. Davis had taken that oath too, back in medical school. He'd only finished 1 year before the draft came. Not enough to be a doctor. Enough to know that medicine wasn't supposed to have sides. Johnson groaned. His eyes found Davis's face. "Doc," he said. His voice was weak. "It hurts." Davis nodded. "I know, Eddie. I'm working on it." The German whispered something in German. Davis didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Pain sounds the same in any language. Davis looked at the Morphine Syrette. It was a small tube with a wire loop at the top and a needle at the bottom. You bent the wire to break the seal, then jabbed the needle into muscle, squeezed the tube to inject the dose. Simple, fast, effective. 1 dose, 7.5 milligrams. Enough to dull the pain for maybe 4 hours. Enough to keep a wounded man calm while you worked. Enough to let him sleep through the worst of it. But only 1 dose. The supply trucks hadn't made it through in 3 days. The roads were cut. The Germans had Bastogne surrounded. Every medic in the division was rationing supplies. Some had run out completely. Davis had been lucky to hold on to this 1 Syrette. He'd planned to save it for something really bad. Now he had 2 really bad cases, and no good answer. Johnson needed morphine to survive the next hour. His blood pressure was dropping. Shock would set in soon. Without pain relief, his body would shut down. Heart rate would spike. Breathing would get worse. He'd die before Davis could get him back to the aid station. The German needed morphine too. Maybe more than Johnson. His leg was destroyed. The pain had to be unbearable. He was already going into shock. His lips had turned blue. His whole body was shaking, not from cold, from agony. Davis closed his eyes. Tried to think. The math was simple but impossible. 1 Syrette, 2 men, both would die without it. Only one could have it. If he gave it to Johnson, the German would lie there screaming until he died. Davis would have to watch that. Listen to it. No, he could have stopped it. If he gave it to the German, Johnson would die in pain. An American soldier, one of his own, someone who'd fought beside him for months, someone who trusted him to do the right thing. There was no right thing, just 2 wrong choices. Davis opened his eyes. Looked at Johnson. "How bad is it, Eddie?" Johnson tried to smile. Couldn't manage it. "Pretty bad, Doc. Can you hold on for a few minutes? I need to check something." Johnson nodded. Closed his eyes. His breathing was getting shallower. Davis turned to the German. The boy was watching him. Fear in his eyes. He knew what was happening. Knew Davis was deciding. "Do you speak English?" Davis asked. The German nodded slightly. "Little," he said. "Little English." "What's your name?" "Klaus." The word came out as a whisper. "Klaus Becker." "How old are you, Klaus?" 18. Davis felt something crack inside his chest. 18. Just a kid. Probably drafted same as Davis. Probably didn't want to be here any more than anyone else did. "Where are you from?" "Stuttgart." Klaus tried to shift position, gasped in pain. "My mother in Stuttgart." Davis looked down at the shattered leg. The bone was pulverized. Even with morphine and proper surgery, Klaus would lose the leg, probably above the knee. That was assuming he survived the next few hours. Assuming Davis could stop the bleeding. Assuming they could get him to a German hospital somehow. Too many assumptions, not enough certainties. "What did you do before the war?" Davis asked. He didn't know why he was asking. Maybe to make Klaus human. Maybe to make the choice harder. Maybe to punish himself. "University," Klaus said. His breathing was labored. Each word took effort. "Studying mathematics. At Stuttgart, first year. Like you, medical school." "How do you know I was in medical school?" "Your hands." Klaus managed a weak smile. "You work like someone with training, not just soldier training, real medical training." Davis was surprised. Klaus was observant even in agony, smart, analytical, the kind of mind that noticed details. "I only did 3 months," Davis said, "before I got drafted." 3 months more than most medics. Klaus said, "You will make good doctor after war." "Maybe, if I survive." "You will survive. Americans always survive. You have supplies, equipment. We have nothing." Klaus coughed. Blood flecked his lips. "No food for 4 days. No ammunition. Officers keep saying reinforcements coming, but nothing comes." Davis understood. The siege worked both ways. The Germans had surrounded Bastogne, but they were stuck too. Overextended, undersupplied, freezing same as everyone else, dying same as everyone else. "Tell me about Stuttgart," Davis said. He was stalling, avoiding the choice. But he needed to know, needed to understand who this boy was before he decided to let him die. Klaus's eyes got distant, remembering something beyond the pain. Beautiful city. Old. Very old. Big church in the center. Stiftskirche. "I used to sit there, study, think. The church was quiet, peaceful." "What about your family?" "My mother has a flower shop on Schulstrasse near the market. She is there every day since my father died." Klaus paused, swallowed hard. 5 years ago, heart attack. I was 13. After that, just my mother and me. Siblings. Had a sister, Greta. She died in 1943, bombing, British. She was visiting Berlin. Wrong place, wrong time. Klaus's voice broke. "My mother lost everyone. Father, daughter, now maybe son." Davis felt the weight of it. Klaus wasn't just a German soldier. He was someone's child. Someone's brother. The last family member his mother had left. If Klaus died here, she'd have nothing. Just a flower shop and memories of everyone she'd lost. "What were you studying?" Davis asked. "In mathematics, I mean." "Number theory. Prime numbers. Distribution patterns. Professor said I had talent. Maybe could do doctorate after war. Research position at university." Klaus coughed again. More blood. "That is done now. Even if I live, no university wants professor with 1 leg." "You don't know that." "I know. Germany is finished. We all know. Just a matter of time." "Then what? Occupation? Reparations? Shame. What place for crippled mathematician in that world?" Davis didn't have an answer. Didn't know what would happen after the war. Didn't know if there would be room for broken people on either side. The world seemed full of broken people already. "My mother will be alone," Klaus said quietly. "That is hardest part. Not the leg, not the pain. Just knowing she will be alone. No one left." Davis looked at him. Really looked at him. Not a German soldier. Not an enemy. Just a kid who loved mathematics and had a mother who would mourn him. A kid who'd been dealt a terrible hand and was trying to make sense of it. Just like Johnson, farm kid from Indiana who wanted to marry Sarah and grow corn, who'd probably never wanted to hurt anyone, who'd ended up here by accident, same as Klaus. Just like Davis, medical student from Pennsylvania who wanted to heal people, who'd been trained to save lives and was now forced to choose between them. Davis checked Johnson's pulse, weak and rapid. The shrapnel had torn through his abdominal wall, probably nicked the liver or intestine. Internal bleeding for sure. Johnson needed a surgeon, not a medic. But the nearest surgical unit was 3 miles away, behind American lines. No way to carry him that far. Not through German positions in the dark. Davis made a decision. He'd stabilize both men first, then worry about the morphine. He pulled out the tourniquet, applied it to Klaus's leg above the knee, tightened it until the bleeding slowed. Klaus screamed. Davis kept working. The tourniquet would save the leg for now. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. After that, the tissue would start dying from lack of blood flow. But it bought time. Next, he packed Johnson's wound with the bandages, pressed hard to slow the internal bleeding. Johnson groaned but didn't scream. That worried Davis more than screaming would have. It meant Johnson was too weak to react properly. Davis worked quickly. His hands knew the motions. Pack the wound, apply pressure, check the pulse, monitor the breathing, all the steps they drilled into him during training, all the procedures that were supposed to save lives. But procedures didn't account for impossible choices. He finished packing Johnson's wound, sat back. Both men were stable for now, not getting better, just not getting worse quite as fast. Davis figured he'd bought them maybe 30 minutes. After that, things would deteriorate quickly. The Morphine Syrette still sat in his palm. He hadn't put it down. Couldn't put it down. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. Davis thought about his training. The instructors at Fort Sam Houston had been clear. American wounded first. That was the rule. It wasn't personal. It was practical. Your side's soldiers kept fighting. If they knew their medics would prioritize them, enemy soldiers would do the same. Everyone understood the arrangement. But this wasn't a tactical decision. This was 2 kids bleeding in a hole in the ground. One American, one German, both terrified, both dying, both human. Davis looked at Klaus. "Why were you out here? Your patrol, I mean." Klaus coughed, swallowed hard. "Looking for food," he said. "Our supplies cut off. Like you." "You're starving too?" Klaus nodded. "No food for 3 days. Officers say, hold the line, wait for relief. But no relief comes." Davis understood. The siege worked both ways. The Germans had surrounded Bastogne, but that meant they were stuck in the snow too. Same cold, same hunger, same fear, just different uniforms. "What do you do?" Davis asked. "Before the war, I mean." "Student," Klaus said. "University, studying mathematics." "Yeah, I was in medical school, first year." Klaus tried to smile, failed. "Then you know, I will lose the leg." Davis didn't lie to him. Probably. Better than dying. Yeah. They sat in silence for a moment. The forest around them was completely quiet. No gunfire, no artillery. Just the wind moving through the frozen trees. It felt wrong somehow, like the war had paused to watch what Davis would do next. Johnson's breathing changed. Got more labored. Davis checked his pulse again. Weaker than before. The bleeding hadn't stopped. The bandages were soaked through already. Time was running out. Davis had always believed in rules. Order, doing things the right way. He'd grown up in Pennsylvania, in a small town where everyone knew everyone. His father was a Baptist minister, taught him about right and wrong from the time he could walk. Clear lines, simple choices. Truth mattered. Honesty mattered. Helping people mattered. But his father's sermons never covered this. Never talked about choosing who lives and who dies. Never explained what to do when the right answer didn't exist. Davis had joined the Army Medical Corps because he wanted to save lives, not take them. He'd gone through basic training like everyone else, learned to shoot, learned to march, learned to follow orders, but he'd never fired his weapon in combat. Never planned to. He was a medic. His job was healing, not killing. Now healing meant choosing, and choosing meant someone would die. The cold was getting worse. Davis's fingers were going numb. He flexed them, trying to keep the blood flowing. The temperature had dropped below 20 degrees. Maybe lower. Hard to tell. Everything felt frozen. Johnson shivered. His lips were turning blue. Hypothermia on top of everything else. Davis pulled off his own field jacket, draped it over Johnson. It wouldn't be enough, but it was something. Klaus was shivering too. Worse than Johnson. The shock and blood loss made him more vulnerable to the cold. Davis had a wool blanket in his pack. He pulled it out, covered Klaus with it. "Thank you," Klaus whispered. Davis nodded. Didn't trust himself to speak. He thought about what would happen if he gave the morphine to Johnson. The German would die slowly, in pain, crying for help that wouldn't come. Davis would have to listen to that. Watch it happen. Know he'd chosen it. But Johnson was his responsibility. An American soldier. Someone who trusted him. Someone whose family would get a telegram if he died. Someone whose mother would ask questions about how her son spent his last moments. Davis couldn't look Johnson in the eye and choose the German instead. Except he also couldn't look at Klaus and let him die screaming. Davis had seen men die before. Lots of them. Normandy Beach was covered with bodies. American boys who'd drowned in the surf or been cut down by machine guns before they got 50 yards inland. Davis had tried to save some of them. Failed, watched them bleed out in the sand while more bullets kicked up spray around them. That was different. Those deaths were random, arbitrary. Davis had done his best. Sometimes his best wasn't enough. He could accept that. It was war. People died. This was different. This wasn't random. This was a choice. Davis's choice. Deliberate. Intentional. He couldn't hide behind circumstances this time. He looked at the Morphine Syrette again, turned it over in his palm. The glass was cold against his skin. The wire loop caught the moonlight. Such a small thing, so much weight. Johnson coughed. Blood flecked his lips. Internal bleeding was getting worse. He didn't have much time left. Davis made up his mind. Leaned over Johnson. "Eddie, I need you to stay with me, okay?" Johnson opened his eyes. Looked at Davis. "I'm trying, Doc." "I know you are. You're doing great." Davis prepared the Syrette. Bent the wire to break the seal. The needle gleamed in the dark. He found a spot on Johnson's thigh, pushed the needle through the fabric of his trousers, into the muscle, squeezed the tube. The morphine went in. Johnson gasped, then relaxed. The pain lines around his eyes started to fade. His breathing eased. Not much, but enough. "That's better," Johnson whispered. "Thanks, Doc." Davis pulled the empty Syrette out. Dropped it in the snow. It was done. The choice was made. Johnson would have a few hours of relief before the end. Klaus would die hard. Davis turned to look at Klaus. The German boy was watching him. He'd seen what Davis did, understood what it meant. His face went slack, not angry, not surprised, just resigned. "I understand," Klaus said. His voice was barely audible. "You must help your own." Davis felt something break inside him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." Klaus nodded, closed his eyes, started to cry, not loudly, just quiet tears running down his face. He didn't beg, didn't plead, just cried. Davis had never felt smaller in his life. He sat there between them, Johnson drifting into a morphine haze, Klaus shaking with pain and cold, both dying, one peacefully, one in agony, all because Davis had made a choice. The minutes crawled past. Davis tried to keep both men warm, talked to them, told them stories about home, about Pennsylvania, about the farm where he'd grown up, about his kid sister who wanted to be a teacher, anything to fill the silence, anything to make it less awful. Johnson stopped responding after about 20 minutes, slipped into unconsciousness. His pulse was thread thin, barely there. The morphine had given him peace, but it couldn't stop the bleeding. Davis knew he had maybe an hour left, maybe less. Klaus was still conscious, still in pain. His shivering had gotten worse. He kept whispering things in German. Davis didn't understand the words, but he understood they were prayers. The same kind of prayers Davis's father used to say before dinner, same cadence, same desperate hope. Davis held Klaus's hand. It was all he could offer. The boy's fingers were ice cold, no strength left in them, but he squeezed back weakly, held on. "Tell me about Stuttgart," Davis said. "What's it like?" Klaus opened his eyes, focused on Davis's face. "Beautiful," he said. "Old buildings. Big church. My mother has a flower shop on the corner near the square. That sounds nice. I worked there in summers, arranging flowers. She taught me." Klaus coughed, blood on his lips now too. Roses were her favorite. "Mine too," Davis lied. He didn't have a favorite flower, but it seemed important to say it. "After the war, I was going to help her, make the shop bigger, maybe have my own someday." "You still can." Klaus shook his head. "No, I am dying. We both know this." Davis wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he'd be fine, but lies felt wrong. Klaus deserved truth in his last moments. "Yeah," Davis said. "I know." Klaus squeezed his hand again. "It is okay. I am ready. I'm sorry I couldn't help you more. You are here. That is enough. I am not alone." They sat together in the darkness. Klaus's breathing got rougher, more labored. His grip on Davis's hand loosened. The shivering stopped. That was a bad sign. It meant his body was shutting down, giving up. Davis kept talking, told Klaus about the farm, about the cows they'd had, about the creek where he used to fish, about the one-room schoolhouse where he'd learned to read, about anything and everything, just so Klaus wouldn't die in silence. Klaus died anyway. Around midnight, his breathing just stopped. One moment there, next moment gone. His hand went limp in Davis's grip. His eyes stayed open, staring at nothing. Davis closed them, pulled the blanket up over Klaus's face, said a prayer. Not for forgiveness. He didn't expect that. Just for Klaus, for his mother in Stuttgart, for the flower shop he'd never run. Then Davis turned to Johnson. The American was still breathing, barely. The morphine had done its job. He'd slept through Klaus's death, wouldn't wake up now, would slip away peacefully in the next hour or so. Davis sat between them, one dead, one dying, both because he'd made a choice. The right choice, according to the rules, the wrong choice, according to his conscience. The war didn't care either way. Dawn came slowly. The sky turned from black to grey. Light filtered through the trees, revealed the frozen landscape. Snow covered everything, made it look clean, peaceful, like the fighting had never happened. Johnson died just after sunrise. Never woke up. Never knew Klaus had been lying right beside him. Never knew what Davis had chosen. He just stopped breathing, slipped away quietly. The morphine had given him that much. Davis sat with both bodies until full daylight. Then he climbed out of the foxhole. His legs were stiff from the cold. His hands were numb. He could barely feel his feet, but he walked back toward the American lines, left the dead behind. 3 days later, Bastogne was relieved. The siege broke. Supply trucks got through. Davis received a fresh shipment of morphine syrettes, dozen of them, more than he'd ever need. He stared at them for a long time, then put them in his bag and went back to work. The war went on. Davis kept being a medic, kept saving lives, kept making choices. But he never forgot that foxhole, never forgot Klaus's face, never forgot the weight of that one Syrette in his palm. He'd done his duty, followed the rules, saved the American first. That was supposed to matter, but when Davis closed his eyes at night, he didn't see Johnson sleeping peacefully. He saw Klaus crying, saw him dying alone in the dark, saw the choice that haunted him more than any wound he'd ever patched. The rules said he'd done right. His conscience said different, and Davis had to live with both. Some weights don't get lighter with time. They just become part of you. The morphine Syrette was Davis's weight. The choice he'd made, the life he'd ended by saving another. It followed him through the rest of the war, through France and into Germany, through VE Day and the trip home, through 50 years of trying to forget and failing. Because in the end, the hardest part of war wasn't the fighting. It was living with what you'd done to survive it. Davis never told anyone about that night. Not his wife, not his kids, not the other veterans he met at reunions. It was his burden alone, his choice, his consequence. He kept one thing from the war. Not a medal, not a uniform, just an empty morphine Syrette, the one he'd used on Johnson. He carried it in his pocket for the rest of his life. A reminder, a penance, a weight that never got lighter. Sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd take it out, turn it over in his hand, feel the glass cool against his skin, and he'd think about Klaus Becker from Stuttgart, 18 years old, student of mathematics, son of a woman who sold roses, and he'd wonder if he'd made the right choice. The answer never came, but the question never left either. That was the price of mercy in war. You saved one life, lost another, and carried both forever. The weeks after that night blurred together. Davis went through the motions, patched wounds, distributed supplies, followed orders, but something had changed inside him. He saw every wounded soldier differently now, saw them as choices instead of patients. The supply situation improved after December 26th. Patton's Third Army broke through the German lines, reopened the roads, trucks started rolling into Bastogne again. Medical supplies flooded the aid stations. Davis suddenly had more morphine syrettes than he knew what to do with. Boxes of them, hundreds. He stared at them for a long time at first day. All that morphine, all those choices he wouldn't have to make anymore. But having them now didn't change what happened when he didn't have them, didn't bring Klaus back, didn't make Johnson's death meaningful. Just proved that timing mattered more than anything else. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong supply situation. Davis started treating German prisoners differently after that. Not obviously. He didn't make a show of it, just gave them the same care he gave Americans. Morphine for pain, bandages for wounds, sulfur powder to prevent infection. Some of the other medics noticed, made comments, asked why he was wasting supplies on Krauts. "They're wounded," Davis said. "That's all that matters. They were shooting at us yesterday, and we were shooting at them. Doesn't change the wounds." The arguments didn't last long. The other medics had their own ghosts, their own impossible choices. They understood even if they didn't agree. War made philosophers out of people who'd never thought past their next meal. Everyone had their lines. Everyone questioned them. On December 22nd, 4 days after Klaus died, Davis was working at an aid station near Foy. American troops had pushed forward, reclaimed some ground. The fighting was brutal. The casualties were heavy. Davis worked 18-hour shifts trying to keep up. A young German prisoner was brought in, shot through the shoulder. Not life-threatening, but painful. The guards dumped him on a stretcher and left. They had bigger problems. The prisoner was maybe 20 years old, scared, in pain, looking at Davis like he might be shot at any moment. Davis had morphine now, plenty of it. The supply trucks were running again. He could give this German relief without sacrificing anyone else, without choosing. He prepared a Syrette. The prisoner watched him with wide eyes, didn't understand what Davis was doing, probably expected to be left to suffer. That's how both sides treated prisoners sometimes. Not officially, but it happened. Davis injected the morphine. The prisoner gasped in surprise. Then relief washed over his face as the pain faded. He looked at Davis with something like gratitude. "Danke," he whispered. "Thank you." Davis nodded, moved on to the next patient, an American private with frostbite, then a lieutenant with a concussion, then a sergeant with a gunshot wound to the leg. One after another. American, German, American, German. Davis treated them all the same now. Wounds didn't have nationalities, just severity. But at night, when the work stopped and the exhaustion set in, Davis would take out the empty Morphine Syrette, the one he'd used on Johnson. He'd kept it, didn't know why, maybe as a reminder, maybe as penance, maybe just to have something concrete to hold on to. He'd turn it over in his hands, feel the weight of it. Remember Klaus's face. Remember the choice. Remember the guilt. Christmas came. The chaplain held a service in a bombed-out church. Davis attended, sat in the back, listened to prayers about peace on earth and goodwill toward men, wondered if God was listening, wondered if God cared about the choices men made in foxholes. After the service, the chaplain found him. Father Murphy, Irish guy from Boston. Good man, better at his job than Davis was at being a medic. "You look troubled, son," Murphy said. Davis shook his head. "Just tired, Father." "It's more than that. I've seen tired. This is something else." Davis didn't answer, didn't know what to say. Murphy waited. Chaplains were good at waiting. Finally, Davis spoke. "Do you believe in right and wrong, Father? Like clear lines, things that are always right or always wrong?" Murphy considered the question. "I believe in principles, but I also believe context matters. Why do you ask?" "I made a choice. Did what I was supposed to do. Followed the rules. But it feels wrong anyway." "What kind of choice?" Davis looked at him, almost told him, almost said it all, but the words stuck in his throat. Saying it out loud would make it real somehow, more real than it already was. "Doesn't matter," Davis said. "It's done." Murphy put a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever it is, son, remember this. We're all doing our best in impossible circumstances. God knows that. Judges us by our intentions, not just our actions. What if my intentions weren't pure? What if I chose the easy answer instead of the right one? Then you're human. We all are. That's why we need grace." Davis wanted to believe that, wanted grace to be enough. But grace didn't bring Klaus back, didn't change what happened, didn't make the choice less real. He thanked Murphy anyway, left the church, went back to work. January came. The Germans retreated. The bulge was broken. American forces pushed east. Davis moved with them. More fighting, more wounded, more death. But no more choices like that night. No more 2 men and 1 Syrette. The division advanced through Belgium, then into Germany itself. Davis saw the towns he'd heard about in geography class, places that looked nothing like the pictures now, just rubble and fire and desperate people trying to survive. They entered German territory in February. The landscape was scarred. Forests were shattered by artillery. Towns were reduced to ruins. The German army was falling apart, retreating, surrendering in groups. The end was coming. But the dying continued. Bullets didn't care which side was winning. Shells didn't discriminate. Davis kept working. kept patching wounds, kept trying to save lives in a war that seemed determined to take them all. He wrote letters home, told his family he was fine, didn't mention Klaus, didn't mention the morphine, didn't mention anything that mattered, just weather and food and how much he missed Pennsylvania. His mother wrote back, said she was proud of him, said he was doing God's work, said she prayed for him every night. Davis read her letters and felt like a fraud. God's work. Right. God probably didn't approve of what he'd done. His kid sister wrote too. Mary, she was 14 now, wanted to know what France was like, what Belgium was like. If Davis had seen the Eiffel Tower, kid questions, innocent questions. Davis wrote back with safe answers, described the countryside, mentioned some French villages, left out the parts about death and choices, and carrying weights that never got lighter. In March, they crossed the Rhine. Davis went with them. The war was accelerating. The German army was collapsing. Everyone knew it would be over soon. Weeks, maybe months, but not years. Davis wondered what he'd do after. Go back to medical school, finish his degree, become the doctor his parents wanted him to be. It felt impossible. How do you go back to studying anatomy and physiology after you've made choices like that? How do you sit in a classroom learning theory when you've held men's lives in your hand? He didn't know, couldn't imagine it. The war had changed him in ways he was still discovering. Every day revealed something new, some part of himself he didn't recognize anymore, some line he'd crossed without meaning to. In early April, they liberated a concentration camp. Davis was among the first medics in. The scene was beyond anything he'd imagined, beyond anything he'd seen in 8 months of war. Skeletal figures wandering like ghosts, bodies stacked like cordwood, the smell of death so thick you could taste it. Davis worked for 3 days straight without sleeping, treating typhus, dysentery, malnutrition, injuries from beatings, conditions he'd only read about in textbooks. Here they were everywhere, hundreds of patients, thousands, more than any medical team could handle. He used morphine freely, too freely probably, but these people had suffered enough. If morphine could ease even a fraction of their pain, Davis would use every Syrette in his bag. No more rationing, no more choices, just relief. But even there, surrounded by horror beyond measure, Davis thought about Klaus, thought about that foxhole, thought about that choice, because somehow it connected. The camp proved what happened when humanity broke down completely, when people became categories instead of individuals, when some lives mattered and others didn't. Davis had made that same calculation. American versus German, us versus them. One life worth more than another. The camp just showed what happened when that thinking went to its logical end. He worked until he collapsed. Malnutrition himself. Exhaustion. The medics forced him to rest, gave him food, made him sleep. When he woke up, the war was still grinding on. The camp was still full of suffering. Klaus was still dead. In late April, Davis was attached to a unit moving through southern Germany. They passed through Stuttgart. Davis walked through the streets, looked for a flower shop, found 3 of them, didn't know which one was Klaus's mother's shop, didn't go into any of them. What would he say? I let your son die screaming while I saved someone else. That wouldn't help anyone. But he stood outside one shop for a long time, watched an old woman arranging roses in the window. She moved slowly, carefully, each flower positioned with precision, like it mattered, like beauty still mattered, even in a broken world. The woman looked up, saw Davis watching. Their eyes met through the glass. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at him. An American soldier, maybe the enemy, maybe the liberator, maybe both. Davis wondered if she was Klaus's mother, wondered if she was waiting for a son who'd never come home, wondered if she knew yet, wondered if she'd ever understand what happened. He walked away, left the roses behind, carried the guilt with him instead. The woman went back to her flowers. Davis went back to the war. The war ended in May. VE Day, celebrations in the streets. Soldiers cheering, drinking, singing. The whole division erupted in relief. It was over. They'd survived. They could go home. Davis stood apart from it all, felt disconnected. The war was over, but his war would never end. Not really. Klaus would always be dying in that foxhole, always looking at him with resigned acceptance, always squeezing his hand in the dark. He got drunk that night. First time in his life, got falling down drunk with a group of other medics. They sang songs, told jokes, cried, laughed, tried to process what they'd survived. Someone asked Davis what he'd do when he got home. He didn't have an answer, couldn't imagine home anymore. Pennsylvania felt like another planet, a place where people didn't make choices like the one he'd made, a place where Morphine Syrettes didn't decide who lived and died. "I don't know," Davis said. "Maybe finish medical school. Maybe not. Haven't thought about it." "You'd make a good doctor," one of the other medics said. "Sullivan, the guy from Chicago. You saved a lot of guys out here." "Lost a lot too," Davis said. "We all did. Can't save everyone." "Yeah, but that wasn't the point. The point wasn't saving everyone. The point was choosing, deciding, playing God with a glass vial and a needle. That's what stuck. That's what followed him." Davis went home in July. Parade in his hometown. People lined the streets. American flags everywhere. His parents were there. His sister, friends from high school. Everyone cheering. Everyone proud. They called him a hero. Thanked him for his service. Shook his hand. Patted his back. Asked about the war. He gave safe answers. Mentioned France and Belgium. Left out the Morphine Syrette and the foxhole and the choice that haunted him. His father hugged him. Said he was proud. Said Davis had done his duty. Served his country. Made the family proud. His mother cried. Happy tears. Relief tears. Her son had come home alive. That's all that mattered to her. His sister Mary asked if he'd killed anyone. She was 15 now, old enough to ask hard questions, young enough to think they had simple answers. "No," Davis said. "I'm a medic. I saved people, not killed them." It was true and a lie at the same time. He hadn't pulled a trigger, hadn't thrown a grenade, but he'd made choices that killed just as surely. Klaus had died because Davis chose Johnson. That was killing by omission, killing by prioritization, still killing. But he couldn't explain that to a 15-year-old, couldn't explain it to anyone who wasn't there. So he lied, said he saved people, let them believe the hero story, let them celebrate. Inside, he felt hollow. He went back to medical school, finished his degree, became a doctor, family practice in the same small town where he'd grown up, treated the same people who'd celebrated his return, delivered their babies, set their broken bones, prescribed their medications. And every time he wrote a prescription for pain medication, he thought about Morphine Syrettes, about choices, about Klaus. The transition to civilian medicine was brutal in ways Davis hadn't anticipated. His hands knew trauma, knew how to stop bleeding with limited supplies, knew how to make impossible decisions in seconds, but civilian medicine operated differently. More time, more resources, more protocols, more bureaucracy. Davis struggled with it. A patient would come in with a minor complaint, headache, upset stomach, something trivial. Davis would nod and listen and prescribe something. But inside he'd be thinking about the waste, about Johnson and Klaus bleeding out while this person worried about a headache. He knew it was unfair, knew everyone's pain mattered, but the contrast was jarring. In war you treated people who were dying. In civilian practice you treated people who thought they were dying. Big difference, hard adjustment. The nightmares started in his second year of medical school. Always the same. The foxhole, the Morphine Syrette, Klaus's face, Johnson's blood. The choice playing out over and over. Sometimes he made different decisions, gave the morphine to Klaus instead, watched Johnson die screaming, woke up feeling worse than before. Other times the dream would shift. He'd have 2 Syrettes, enough for both men. But when he reached for them, they'd vanish, or he'd drop them in the snow and couldn't find them, or they'd turn out to be empty. Always some cruel twist that forced the choice anyway. He'd wake up sweating, heart pounding. Helen beside him in later years, asking if he was okay. He'd say yes. Say it was just a dream. But it wasn't just a dream. It was memory dressed up as nightmare. Same difference in the end. Davis saw a psychiatrist once. 1952. The nightmares were getting worse. Affecting his work, his marriage, everything. The psychiatrist was a kind man. Older, probably saw combat himself in the First World War. He listened to Davis's story, took notes, asked questions. At the end of the session, he said, "You're suffering from what we call battle fatigue, not uncommon in combat veterans. The mind struggles to process traumatic experiences. Can you fix it?" Davis asked. "Not fix, but we can help you manage it. Process the memories, reduce their power over you." They met weekly for 6 months. Talked through the war, through Bastogne, through Klaus and Johnson and the Morphine Syrette. The psychiatrist was good at his job. Patient, insightful, non-judgmental. But it didn't help. Not really. Because the problem wasn't processing the memory. Davis understood what happened. Understood the context. Understood the impossible position he'd been in. Understanding didn't change the guilt. Didn't change the choice. Didn't bring Klaus back. After 6 months, Davis stopped going. Thanked the psychiatrist. Said he felt better. Another lie. But a necessary one. The talking was making it worse somehow. Giving the weight more attention didn't lighten it, just made it more central. So Davis went back to carrying it quietly. Privately, the way he'd been doing before. He practiced medicine, got better at it, learned to separate the war from the work. Mostly, treated patients with genuine care. Made house calls, sat with dying people. Did everything a country doctor was supposed to do. But there were moments when it all came rushing back. A car accident victim with massive trauma, Davis would be right back in Normandy. Blood everywhere, screaming, chaos. His hands would shake until he forced them steady. Did the work, saved who he could. Or a child would come in with a broken bone. Simple fracture, easy fix. But Davis would see Klaus's shattered leg, see the bone protruding, feel the weight of the choice, have to excuse himself for a moment to breathe. Helen noticed. She always noticed, would ask if he was okay. He'd say yes, say it was nothing. She'd look at him with those patient eyes and not believe him, but not push either. Just be there, steady, present. He married in 1950. Good woman, patient, understanding. Her name was Helen. She'd been a nurse during the war, served in England, never saw combat but understood the aftermath, understood men who came back different, who carried things they couldn't name. They met at a medical conference in Philadelphia, started talking, kept talking, discovered they both loved the same poets, the same music, the same quiet evenings reading instead of socializing. Helen didn't push, didn't demand stories, just existed beside him, patient and present. She knew something haunted him. She was too observant not to notice. The way he sometimes stared at nothing, the nightmares that woke him up, the Morphine Syrette he kept in his desk drawer. She asked about it once. "What is that?" she'd said, finding it while looking for a pen. "A reminder," Davis had said. "Of what?" "Of a choice I made, a long time ago." She'd looked at him, seen the pain in his eyes, decided not to push. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No, not yet. Maybe someday." "Okay," she'd said. Put the Syrette back. Never mentioned it again. That was love, Davis thought. Not demanding confession, not pushing for details, just accepting that some weights couldn't be shared, just being there anyway. They had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, born in 1951, 1953, and 1955, Michael, Thomas Jr., and Sarah. Davis threw himself into fatherhood, changed diapers, read bedtime stories, taught them to ride bikes. All the normal things fathers did. Michael was the oldest, serious kid, thoughtful, asked big questions from an early age. Why is the sky blue? Where do people go when they die? Why do bad things happen? Davis answered as best he could, but some questions didn't have good answers, especially the ones about death and suffering. When Michael was 7, he found a dead bird in the backyard, brought it to Davis, asked if they could save it. Davis explained that sometimes things died and couldn't be fixed. Michael cried, asked why Davis couldn't help if he was a doctor. Because some things are beyond medicine, Davis said. Some things we can't change. Michael looked at him with those serious eyes. But you try, right? You always try. Always, Davis said. And he thought about Klaus, about trying and failing, about choices that haunted you forever. Thomas Jr. was different. Energetic, athletic, always moving. He wanted to be a soldier when he grew up, would play war in the backyard with the neighborhood kids, pointed stick rifles, charging imaginary enemies, dying dramatically when shot. It made Davis's stomach turn. He'd smile and wave, pretend it was cute, but inside he wanted to scream, wanted to tell his son that war wasn't a game, that real soldiers died in mud and blood and terror, that the Morphine Syrette was real, and the choices were impossible and nothing was glory or adventure. But he didn't, couldn't. How do you explain that to an 8-year-old? How do you steal their innocence without cause? So Davis let him play, hoped he'd never see real war, hoped Vietnam would be over before Thomas Jr. came of age. It wasn't. Thomas Jr. got drafted in 1973. Davis's worst fear realized. His son going to war, maybe making the same impossible choices, maybe carrying the same impossible weights. But Thomas Jr. never saw combat. Stationed in Germany, never fired a shot in anger, came home in 1975 unchanged, still energetic, still optimistic, still innocent in ways Davis would never be again. Davis thanked God for that. Whatever God was listening, whatever mercy still existed in the world. Sarah was the youngest, born in 1955, gentle soul, caring. She'd bandage her doll's imaginary wounds, want to help every hurt animal, cry when other kids got hurt on the playground. She reminded Davis of himself before the war, before Bastogne, before Klaus, back when he thought medicine was about healing and nothing more, back when choices were clear and rules made sense. He tried to protect that in her, tried to shield her from the hard truths, let her believe the world was good, that helping people mattered, that kindness was enough. She became a social worker, helped families in crisis, dealt with abuse and poverty and all the ugly things people did to each other. It broke her heart regularly, but she kept doing it, kept trying, kept believing it mattered. Davis was proud of her, proud she'd chosen to help. But he worried too, worried she'd face impossible choices like he had, worried she'd have to decide who to help when she couldn't help everyone, worried she'd learn that good intentions weren't enough. He wanted to warn her, wanted to tell her about Klaus and the Morphine Syrette, about how sometimes you do everything right and it still feels wrong, about how the weights never go away. But he didn't, couldn't. She needed to find her own path, make her own choices, carry her own weights if they came. All he could do was be there, answer when she called, listen when she struggled, love her through the hard parts, same as she'd done for him without knowing it. Davis taught his children right from wrong, told them about honesty and integrity and doing the right thing, wondered if he had any business teaching those lessons. But he tried anyway. He told them to always help when they could, to be kind, to see people as individuals, not categories, to remember that everyone was somebody's child, somebody's family, somebody who mattered. He didn't tell them about Klaus, but Klaus informed every lesson, every value he tried to instill, every principle he hoped they'd carry. Because if his children learned nothing else, Davis wanted them to understand that every life had value, that enemies were still human, that rules and protocols mattered less than conscience, that sometimes the right answer wasn't in the manual. Whether they understood the deeper meaning, he didn't know. They nodded, said yes, Dad, went about their lives, made their own choices, carried their own weights. And Davis watched them grow, watched them become good people, watched them try to make the world better in their own ways, felt pride and fear and love all tangled together. Because being a parent meant watching people you love face impossible situations, meant knowing you couldn't protect them from everything, meant trusting they'd make good choices even when you weren't there to guide them. Same way soldiers trusted medics to make good choices, same way Klaus had trusted Davis in that foxhole, same way Davis had failed him anyway. The weight of fatherhood layered on top of the weight of war, different weights, same burden. The constant knowledge that your choices affected other lives, that you could do everything right and still fail, that love and good intentions weren't always enough. Davis carried it all, the father weight, the soldier weight, the medic weight, the choice weight, stacked like stones on his shoulders. Heavy, permanent. The years passed. The war became history. Young people didn't remember it. Then their kids didn't learn about it. Davis grew old, retired, watched his grandchildren grow up in a world that had forgotten what he'd done. But Davis didn't forget. Couldn't forget. Close was still there. Still A-team, still dying, still waiting for help that Davis had chosen not to give. On Davis's 75th birthday, his family threw him a party. The grandkids made a big sign. His daughter baked a cake. Everyone gathered around, sang songs, told stories, celebrated a life well lived. Davis smiled, thanked them, ate cake, played with the grandkids, did all the things you're supposed to do at 75. But that night, alone in his study, he took out the Morphine Syrette. The glass had yellowed with age. The needle had rusted, but it was still there, still real, still proof of what he'd done. He turned it over in his hands, felt the weight of it, same weight as 50 years before. Heavier, maybe. Time hadn't lightened it at all. His wife found him there, an hour later, sitting in the dark, holding a piece of glass. "What is that?" she asked gently. Davis looked at her, saw the concern in her eyes, the love, the patience, all the years she'd given him without demanding answers. "A reminder," he said. "Of what?" "Of a choice I made, a long time ago." She sat down beside him, didn't touch the Syrette, just sat there, present, patient. "Was it the right choice?" she asked. Davis thought about that. 50 years of thinking about it. Still no answer. "I don't know," he said finally. "I followed the rules, did what I was supposed to do, but it didn't feel right. Still doesn't. Did anyone survive because of your choice?" "One man, for a few hours." "Then maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all anyone can do. Save who you can, live with the rest." Davis wanted to believe that, wanted it to be that simple, but Klaus's face wouldn't let him. The prayers in German, the hand going limp, the choice that had seemed so clear at the time and so wrong ever since. "I let someone die," Davis said. "Someone young, someone who could have lived. You were at war. People die in war. But this was different. This was my choice. Deliberate. I chose who lived and who died." His wife took his hand, and you've been punishing yourself ever since. For 50 years. Don't you think that's enough?" Davis didn't answer. Punishment wasn't the point. You didn't punish yourself to make it better. You carried the weight because someone had to. Because Klaus couldn't carry it himself anymore. They sat together in the quiet, the house settling around them, the grandkids asleep upstairs, the life they'd built together solid and real. But underneath it all, that foxhole in Bastogne, that choice in the dark, that weight that never went away. Davis held the morphine syrette until his hand cramped. Then he put it back in his desk drawer, same place it had been for 50 years, same place it would stay until he died. Because some things you carried forever, not to punish yourself, not to remember, just because they were yours, your choice, your burden, your war, that never really ended. Davis lived another 10 years, died in his sleep at 85, peaceful, surrounded by family. The morphine syrette was in his pocket. He'd asked to be buried with it. His wife made sure it happened. At the funeral, people talked about his life, the patients he'd helped, the community he'd served, the family he'd raised, good things, true things, a life that mattered. But nobody mentioned Klaus. Nobody knew about the choice in the foxhole, about the German boy who died in the dark, about the weight Davis had carried for 60 years. That secret went into the ground with him. The morphine syrette, the choice, the guilt, all of it buried in Pennsylvania soil, far from Bastogne, far from Stuttgart, far from the war that had ended 6 decades before. But in a way, Klaus was buried there too, not his body. That was probably in some German cemetery somewhere, or maybe never found at all, but the memory of him, the choice about him, the weight of him, all laid to rest with the man who'd chosen. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all the peace either of them would ever get. A medic and the enemy soldier he couldn't save, both finally done carrying the weight, both finally allowed to rest. The morphine syrette stayed in Davis's pocket, rusted, yellowed, empty, a relic of a choice made in the dark, of mercy given and mercy denied, of the impossible mathematics of war, where 1 + 1 never equals 2 lives saved, only one, always one, and the other becomes a weight you carry forever. That's what Davis learned in Bastogne. Not tactics, not medicine, just that simple, terrible truth, that sometimes doing the right thing feels wrong, and sometimes doing wrong is all you can do, and either way you carry it for years, for decades, for a lifetime. And when people thank you for your service, you smile and nod, because what else can you do? You can't explain, can't make them understand, can't share the weight. It's yours alone. So you carry it, quietly, privately, until the day you die and take it with you, hoping maybe there's a place beyond where weights don't matter anymore, where Klaus is waiting, not angry, not accusing, just there, another young man who did what he was told and died for it. And maybe in that place, Davis could finally say the words he'd carried for 60 years, the words that mattered more than any rule or order or protocol. I'm sorry. That's all. Just that. Sorry for the choice. Sorry for the pain. Sorry for choosing someone else. Sorry Klaus had to die alone in the dark while an enemy held his hand and wished it could have been different. 3 words. A lifetime too late. But maybe still worth saying. Maybe still mattering somehow. The morphine syrette went into the ground. The story went with it. The weight stayed buried, and the war at long last